Okay, can everyone hear me if I speak like this? Okay, first, thank you all for being here this morning. I think you've all came across a lot of cetacean studies throughout the week. It's a field that is well represented in the symposium. You may have heard of acoustic technique. They are gaining in popularities in this last decades. And so I did my thesis in GMIT, and today I will explain to you how we can use a combination of visual and acoustic monitoring to explore the habitat use of a species, in that case the bottlenose dolphins that inhabit the Shannon Estuary special area of conservation in Ireland. So 25 species of cetaceans are known to occur in Ireland, which have triggered the implementation of conservation measures on the national level back in the last century, both through the Whale Fisheries Act and the Wildlife Act. More recently, this legislation have been strengthened by a European directives, such as the European Habitat Directive, which entitles member states to strictly protect all cetacean species and also to designate special area of conservation for two species, which are harbor porpoises and bottlenose dolphins. The status of these two populations also has to be reported as indicator in the Marine Framework Strategy Directive for assessment of good environmental status. I'm sorry about the little font issues. That was not really planned, but it will do. So in response to this legislation, the Shannon Estuary, which is located in the southwest coast of Ireland, has been designated as special area of conservation for bottlenose dolphins. Bottlenose dolphins in the estuary range globally on the whole area, and some area here in blue have been identified as critical habitat. Moneypoint is the study area of this particular presentation. The resident population here is estimated to be around 110 individuals. It's the only resident population on the Irish waters, and it has been recently suggested that it's genetically isolated from the other coastal population. And so this drives some serious conservation concerns. It's a very vulnerable population, and we need close-up monitoring if we really want to anticipate any early changes that would be crucial for the survival of the population. When it comes to monitoring techniques, the most traditionally used one are the visual monitoring. It is instinctive, easy to implement. It doesn't require a lot of material, and it allows to collect really rich information. However, it has its drawbacks. It is limited to the good visibility conditions. We cannot survey at night or when the weather is bad, and we only perceive the surface life of the animal, which is in case of cetaceans very limited. In response to these challenges, acoustic techniques have been widely developed the past few decades. It is independent from visibility condition, and when it can be deployed for extended period of time, we can actually reveal some temporal patterns occurring across seasonal cycle, tidal cycle, diel cycle. The negative point is that it only detects the cetaceans that are vocally active, and so far we are limited in terms of the nature of information we can collect. It's mainly presence-absence data or species identification. But we need a better knowledge of the contextual use of the different calls produced by the species to be able to collect more information, for example, regarding behavior. So if I present a bit the different calls that can be produced by bottlenose dolphins in the area, or everywhere actually, there are burst pulse sounds. There are clicks that they use for echolocation, mainly for navigation and foraging purposes. And there are whistles. They are narrow band modulated frequency signals. They are very various in terms of shape, frequency pattern, modulation. And so because of this complexity and the fine-scale modulation that are observed in whistles, it is a consensus accepted between researchers that it has a possibility to convey a lot of information, although we haven't cracked the code yet, if I can say. And a few studies have started to link the whistle characteristics with the behavioral state at the moment of production, and that will be of critical importance if we want, for example, to use only acoustic data to explore habitat use. We need to know what the dolphins are doing. So this brings me to the objective of this thesis. There are two big aspects to it. First, we want to characterize the presence of the dolphins in this area using both acoustic and visual technique. We want to explore where they are using these sites on a daily basis and investigate whether or not environmental cycles such as tidal cycle, diel cycle, and tidal phase have an influence on dolphins detection. The second aspect of the thesis is focused on whistles. We want to establish a correlation with the whistle parameters and the surface behavior recorded at the same time to see if we could potentially use these characteristics to infer behavior when we cannot see the dolphins, for example, during the night. So to do this, we used an pre-existing data set. Recordings were collecting during summers 2007 and 2008. So the setup was located in Moneypoint, so this is a power station, and the recordings were done from the coast here. For the acoustic setup, we had an hydrophone that was moored approximately 1 meter above the seabed, and then it was connected to a cable that was running ashore, and this was connected to a recording unit, so a laptop, a hard drive, and also an amplifier box that was filtering out the low frequency noises. When it was possible, simultaneously to this acoustic recording, visual observation took place, and among the collected data, there were foraging behavioral information, and so it was collected in terms of predominant group behavior for each sighting, and we had 3 main categories: foraging, traveling, and socializing. Miling is a kind of intermediate behavior that was sometimes reported, but we really didn't use it in analysis. So for the whistle contour parameters, we scanned the recordings manually, and we extracted parameters using Raven software. Some were extracted automatically from a selection box. Others were selected manually. We had start frequency, end frequency, duration of the whistle, number of inflection points, minimum and maximum frequency, also the frequency range, and the exact timing of the whistle. We also classified each whistle into shape categories. We had the simple tones that were up sweeps, down sweep, and flat tones. Slightly more complex whistles that were convex whistles, concave, and 2 kinds of waves. And finally, the most complex whistles were sine whistles, connected up sweeps, and connected down sweeps. For data analysis, so for the first aspect regarding the dolphin's temporal occurrence at the site and the influence of the environmental parameters on it, we did use the vocalization timing extracted. From this, we derived some detection positive minutes. So for each minute on effort, we were able to say if dolphins were present or not. And for each minute, we were also able to extract the corresponding environmental state. So tidal cycle was ebbing or flooding tide, slack high or slack low. A diel cycle was evening, morning, night, or day. And tidal phase was spring tide, neap tide, or transitional tide. We put all of this data into a generalized linear model to explore the relationship between them. For the question of the effect of surface behavior or environmental cycles on the whistle variability, we only kept good quality whistles. For each of them that were associated to simultaneous visual survey, we were able to assign the corresponding behavior, and we were also possible to assign the corresponding environmental state. We looked at the whistle variability in terms of 3 aspects. So first, the frequency duration parameters that I showed on the slide before. Then we also had the whistle modulation degree, which corresponds to the number of inflection points. And finally, the whistle shape. So here are my results. What can we observe in the area? So first of all, we had 610 hours surveyed, and dolphins were present in approximately 13% of the minutes on effort, which means that the site is very active in terms of dolphins detection. Regarding the effect of the different environmental cycles on the detection, we had significant effect of all the 3 parameters. If we have a look, so on the box plot here, you can see this is tidal cycle levels, tidal phase, diel cycle, and here are the predicted proportion of detection positive minute from the GLM. And so for tidal cycle, we had maximum detection during ebbing and low tide, slightly less during high tide, and minimum detection during flooding tide. Tidal phase, spring tide coincided with the most the highest number of detection, neap tide minimum, and transitional falling in between. For diel cycle, we had less detection during the day than we had during evening, morning, and night. So now the question is, what are the dolphins actually doing here? So this is what we got from the visual monitoring. Over 286 hours surveyed, they cited 92 groups. Most of them were found foraging, which was almost 40% of the groups. Then traveling, and miling and socializing were less represented in the area. This graph here just shows that the detection pattern by visual survey is similar to acoustic, so maximum during ebbing, minimum during flooding. Now the question is, can we determine this kind of information, so habitat use, what the dolphins are doing here, based on acoustic data alone? If we have a look of the whistle frequency and duration parameters, so I conducted a linear discriminant analysis, and so this is showing the best way to discriminate among behavior using two linear combinations of the frequency parameters, so minimum, maximum, start, end frequency, delta frequency, and duration. As you can see on the graph, there is no clear clustering between the three behaviors, which are indicated by the color. The classifier efficiency was really poor. It was 1 out of 3 observations correctly classified, which is totally random. And so it means that from this data set, there is no way for now we can infer the behavior based on the frequency parameters of the whistles. If we have a look at the inflection point, like the modulation degree and the shape of the whistle, we have much more interesting results. So first of all, for the modulation degree, this is shown by the colors on the graph. You have in dark blue the whistles that are non-modulated, so simple tones. They can be upsweep, downsweep, flat tones. And in light blue, the whistles that have one or more inflection points. So we can see that during foraging and socializing behavior, it's mainly non-modulated whistles, whereas during traveling, we have a dominance of modulated whistles. This reflects what we observe if we have a look at the shape of the whistle. So now it's the x-axis of the graph. You have the 5 main categories of whistles we encountered. So it was upsweeps, downsweeps, flat tones, convex whistle, and sine whistle. And we can see that sine whistle and convex whistle dominate traveling behavior, whereas it's upsweeps, downsweeps, and flat tones that dominate foraging and socializing behavior. So this gives interesting results, and if we were to detect such pattern, for example, across night, maybe we would be able to define a predominance of a certain type of behavior across the diel cycle, but we didn't find any relationship. So what does its results tell us? The temporal pattern we observe from the acoustic detection has already been described in the area using only click detection. Although we didn't find a correlation between what we observe from visual and, for example, the tidal state, there are previous studies that shows that the dolphin in the area show increased presence during maximum flowing rates, and it has been hypothesized that this is due to foraging strategies. And we know that foraging is the main behavior encountered in the area, so it makes sense. Concerning what we observe across the diel pattern, it could be linked to prey behavior, for example, because we have more detection during darkness hours. However, we need more information on the dolphin diet in this area to be able to affirm this. From what we observed of the variation of whistles according to behavior, so the dominance of simple tones for foraging and socializing activities has been described in other populations, so in the estuary at another location, lower estuary, but also in Australia and in Spain. The dominance of modulated whistles for traveling has also been reported in other populations across the world, and it is hypothesized that the higher modulation degrees will allow the dolphins to avoid masking and compete with interference to better keep the cohesion group when changing area. Before I jump to the conclusion and the future perspective, I'd like to introduce to you a bit the limitation of the study. First, we have a problem of autocorrelation when we study the temporal pattern of occurrence of the dolphin. It just means that, for example, if I have a dolphin present for 1 minute, it's highly likely that it's going to be present the next minute. So there is this kind of limitation we need to discuss. We can do it a bit more after if you want. Then, concerning the whistle aspect to it, there is a problem of pseudo-replication. So first of all, the whistles are often produced in boots, and so excuse the typo, I just mean series and sequence and not actual shoes. I'm sorry. So it means the dolphins often, when they will produce a whistle, there will be maybe 5 or 6 produced in the same minute, and they will be very similar to each other. There is also a lot of confounding variable we cannot control for due to fieldwork limitation. For example, we cannot know the identity of the dolphin that is vocalizing, so we cannot know his age, his sex, reproductive state. An important fact to consider when studying bottlenose dolphins is the existence of signature whistles. Each dolphin produces a stereotyped whistle that is unique to him, and it may represent up to 50% of the total whistles produced in a population. So in that case, the identity of the dolphin have a huge influence on our total pool of whistles. Future perspective in the area, I think it will be interesting to combine with photo identification. Almost all the dolphins of the estuary are identified from photo identification, so we could maybe identify the signature whistles and control for some confounding variables. If this works, we could also use acoustic for mark recapture technique. Another point that would be interesting to assess is the anthropogenic impact on the repertoire of the dolphins. Like the Shannon estuary is a major shipping route, so maybe noise pollution will have an importance. So what I want you to remember from this presentation is that Moneypoint is a critical area for foraging of the dolphins. The temporal pattern that is described over tidal cycle and diel cycle is probably due to foraging strategies and hunting efficiency. Although we didn't find a strong relationship between the frequency parameters and the behavior, we were able to link the shape of the whistle and the modulation degree with the behavior. So it lays some interesting results to use the whistle as habitat use exploring tools. This work contributes to our basic knowledge of the dolphins in this estuary, and it will improve the way we interpret acoustic data in future conservation and management plans. I would like to thank my supervisor and so Dr. Joanne O'Brien and all the person I met and worked with in GMIT, as well as the master degree for the opportunity, and all my friends and family for the support. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So.